presence here today is to reassure the Israeli people there is no light or gaps between President Trump and Bibi about what to do and how to do it. There are two lines in the water right now. One's a diplomatic line, trying to find a way to end this regime diplomatically that will advance our national security interest. The other line is the military option. I think President Trump is looking for which line can catch the biggest fish. The bottom line is we're into weeks, not months, in terms of decision making.
And joining me now from Princeton, New Jersey, is Dr. Dalia Fahmy, an associate professor of political science at Long Island University. Doctor, in your view, are we closer to a U.S. attack on Iran now, or do you actually see signs that diplomacy might be working?
Well, I think we need to look at this at two levels. So if we look at the military exercises, for example, that Iran conducted in the Strait of Hormuz, that was responded to by the release of images by U.S. Central Command of drills on the USS Abraham Lincoln. We know that the Lincoln is going to be joined by a larger USS carrier, the Gerald Ford. So we're seeing at one level that the bargaining range between two countries is really that they're at, really facing one another, that there perhaps isn't any bargaining range. But if you listen to what's happening today abroad, there's probably a little bit of foreground for us to talk about. So what are the negotiating positions that Iran has, and what are the negotiating positions that the United States has? Iran wants the lifting of economic sanctions. The economic conditions of Iran are becoming more and more difficult, especially in this political moment where there's such internal upheaval with the crackdown of the Iranian regime on the protesters, leading up to upwards of 7,000 deaths. So the insistence that there's going to be no submission before threats, that was made today by the Iranian foreign minister, but then acknowledging internally that Iran doesn't really have that much of a bargaining range. There is this kind of space where the U.S. and Iran are also negotiating on the ballistic missile program. It's not just the uranium enrichment. Iran is not putting that on the table because it's really all that Iran has left strategically in the region, with the change in leadership in Syria, with the eradication of Hezbollah to a certain extent in Lebanon, and in what's happening in Gaza. Iran's bargaining range has fundamentally shifted in the past couple of years. Now let's look at this from the United States perspective. It's about the nuclear weapons program. We know that Iran is willing to give up not just part of an enrichment program, but also give up what's already been enriched. So in terms of what the United States wants and what Iran's willing to give up, there actually is a lot more bargaining at play here. The zero-sum negotiation that we're seeing, that Iran and the United States are on the brink of war, I'm not sure if this is just strategic positioning or if there's something more at play here.
So you don't think that diplomacy on the verge of failing and that the U.S. might actually be sort of preparing a strike? You think that there's still sort of some leeway here in terms of reaching an agreement between these two sides?
So the reality is that we are no longer in the diplomatic conditions of the past, right? We are under, for example, here in the United States, an administration that takes politics as transaction, that military strikes are seen as something that doesn't really have a long-term effect. So why not force the hand, if you will, through military strikes rather than through diplomacy? So on one hand, if we were to look at the diplomatic avenues before us, there is a bargaining range, and Iran is no longer in the position it was even 6 months ago. However, with the way the U.S. administration likes to act, that perhaps a bit more heavy-handed, in that regard, yes, there is a level of pessimism that the second round of talks that are going to start tomorrow may not lead to the bargaining that diplomacy should lead to. Again, we're in a different position in the world today where the kind of diplomatic world order that we took for granted since World War II has been redefined by the current U.S. administration.
Dr. Fahmy, do you see that there's a risk, or do you think there's a risk here to the Iranian regime that Trump might actually be seeking to put another kind of leadership at the top of the palaces in Tehran?
Regime change in Iran, while it's being discussed in certain circles in Washington, D.C. and in different parts of the capitals of the world, is not really plausible if there is no alternative. And it's not clear that there is an alternative in place. Now, understanding that regime change doesn't solve much, yes, this is a regime that's been pretty brutal to its own people, especially what we've seen in images in the past couple of months. change usually does not come, sustainable change doesn't usually come from outside. It usually comes from the inside. We haven't seen a kind of alternative emerge from within the Iranian people. And so the idea that through sanctions or through certain military strikes, it's going to lead to regime change is not really plausible or practical. And I don't think that that's actually in the U.S. strategic interest. So while the president might say that, I don't believe those that are in central command are actually thinking that.
All right, Dr. Fahmy, always good to have you on the program. Thank you so much for your analysis.